And welcome to another episode of Patriots 4th and 2. I'm your host, Derek Havens. Joining me as always, Steve Valscherry. We are both PatsFans.com bloggers. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about everything that kind of came out of the 2025 NFL Combine. There's some rumors, who stood out, who didn't, and a couple of different pieces from the press conferences from different coaches around the league, including Mike Vrabel and also, executive Elliot Wolf. Before we do anything, of course, as we always do, Steve, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, although a little tired this morning. I was up working late last night, so I know you're in the same boat, so we'll just wake up with some good football talk
Yeah,
and
yeah.
coffee.
Yes, this is my second cup already, and I'm not even a big coffee drinker, but ever since I had a baby, I am. It's funny how that works. Ever since my wife and I
You'll
had a
be a
baby.
huge coffee drinker before long.
Oh yeah, brewing just pots at a time here. So anyway, well, let's jump into it, Steve. Look, the combine's always interesting every year. We have so much to unpack, so I want to try to keep today's episode as I want to move relatively quickly through each topic because I feel like there's so much to discuss. So I think one of the biggest things, Steve, about the combine is not necessarily just the drills. The measurements are great. Obviously the medicals are super important. Just so people have some background. The great thing about the combine in Indianapolis is the fact that they have actually fiber optic cables running underneath the stadium and two hospitals in the area. They built the stadium basically designed to host an event like this. And so you're going through several hundred MRIs of all these different guys, different testing, different measurements. You're able to actually see guys because we know how like athletic departments in different colleges fluff heights, weights, etc. This way you kind of go ahead and get a little bit of a more accurate, measurement. You're able to go ahead and get your own medicals. Now, each team is allowed 30 player visits in person to go ahead and you can have their own, doctors or whatever, do any kind of workup or rechecks or whatever, do some board testing, things like that. But at the same time, it's important to go ahead and just kind of get everyone on the same page so we can see really actually the cream rises to the top, Steve, right? And you always find that truth. So there's a lot of benefits to this. I know it's kind of become like this big spectacle, the underwear Olympics, etc. But it is important. It may be not necessarily important to see oh, this person put up 30 reps, but it is good to see where guys are, the broad jump, the vertical, show some explosiveness. Obviously, we talk about the 40, the split times, the bench press shows that you've been in the weight room, and your strength and your explosiveness there. So there are benefits. Again, some of it's overblown. But one of the biggest things, Steve, also, which is a sidebar of this is kind of where the illegal tampering begins. Okay, let's just call a spade a spade. So you got all these agents, all these players, coaches, executives. They're at St. Elmo's in the evening. They're having some bourbons. They're having some cocktails, and they're rubbing elbows, and they're talking about things. These are where some of the rumors start. It's always interesting to see how much things shift from the beginning of the combine to the end of it because you start to put dots together and you can kind of see things line up. So let's dive into the rumors first. With the measurements are the measurements. Guys know. I don't mean to go on this big monologue or anything, but guys know who are listening. Anyone who's listening to the show it can look up, stats or whatever of certain players. And we'll talk about a couple guys that impressed us because there were several. But the rumors are really some of the juiciest stuff to come out of this, Steve. So why don't you kick us off here? Anything that really jumped out to you from what you heard, any whispers coming out of Indianapolis this weekend?
Well, I think the big one was that the Patriots were pretty much out on T. Higgins because they felt like supposedly that the cost of acquiring a guy like him is going to be out of control. So we heard the rumor that they were out on T. Higgins, which is, I mean, I can understand that, but it is a little surprising. And the other, obviously, and Vrabel mentioned this in his initial press conference, is that they're going to prioritize building the trenches first, which, I mean, we kind of expected that, but there are some intriguing prospects that are out there, and you're wondering, after free agency, how are they, going to approach the draft, right? Because, if they get a big left tackle like a Ronnie Stanley, right, in free agency, is that priority of getting a left tackle now much lower priority? I mean, I think they should still draft one, but would you do it in the mid to late rounds, or still draft one to have in the wings? Because as we know, they kind of need a right tackle too, although they have high hopes for Caden Wallace. But are you going to bank on that?
I had heard a little bit of a rumor from someone who was there, that the whispers from the Patriots standpoint on the street in terms of the trenches were, for one, to highlight a point that you just made, they have been very open about building through the trenches. There's no secret. This is not a shell game. This is not a smoke screen. They are going to totally flip it. Now, depending on what kind of front they're going to end up running, whether on defense, whether it's 3 defensive linemen or 4, if you include the 5 offensive linemen, you have about 8 or 9 guys. I was told that expect almost a 50% turnover. That there are rumors that they could have literally 3 new offensive linemen, aside from Andrews and Onwenu, but everyone else could be totally replaced. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all.
Nope.
So I think defensively, you're going to go ahead and see some different things. Let's jump into Devon Godshaw, for example. Apparently, the team rumored letting him kind of seek a trade. Not surprising, more of a 2-gapper, good defensive lineman, pretty good against the run. I know the Patriots struggled against the run as a team last year, but I wouldn't put that on just him. I don't think that's fair. But I think it doesn't quiet the whisper, Steve, that it's going to be more of a penetrating front between Vrabel and Tyrell Williams. So what are your thoughts on the Godshaw situation? Because I think that also kind of plays hand in hand of our previous discussion too.
Absolutely, and I think it speaks for itself. Godshaw is a very good nose tackle. He's that guy at the point of attack that lined up over the center. He knows he's going to get double teamed on every play. That's his job. But if they go to that more attacking front, the penetrating front, that big 2-gapping nose tackle is not really needed at that point. So they know Godchau's been a good guy. He's played well for them. He's started. He's played all 68 games that he's been a Patriot. He started 67. So I mean, he's obviously durable, and he's been able to answer the bell every week. So if a team is looking for that 2-gapping nose tackle type of player, they know he's a good player. His contract isn't ridiculous. I mean, he's making a good chunk of change, but it's not going to break the bank on you. And he's going to be there every week. So I think it speaks for itself that they're going to change their philosophy. And, I wonder about him. I wonder about Dietrich Wise.
Yeah, I have I'm starting to really doubt if Wise is going to be on the team either. I think they're going to. This is total. I don't want to. I never like to be reckless like this. I never want to make it sound like I'll say flat out if I heard something or if I was talking to someone. This is pure speculation. This has nothing to do with anything that I've heard. I wonder, Steve, if Vrabel is going to establish kind of new core guys. What I mean by that is you could consider Godshaw and Wise kind of like vocal veteran leaders in the room. I wonder with Vrabel wanting to establish his own culture that he doesn't try to weed out some of those guys that not only don't fit his scheme, but also make ways for him to go ahead and lay out his own kind of culture and environment that he wants to establish in the locker room. And that makes me, based on scheme, for Wise and Godchow, and also based on culture, I have a feeling that those guys could be on the outside looking up. And as we are looking in, and as you and I have talked about on a previous show within the last couple of weeks, we're expecting 35, 35, 40, 45%, like give or take, like pretty strong roster turnover as a whole. So I don't think it's out of, I don't think me putting the dots together of looking at some of these guys and being like, you know what, I'm not sure these guys fit what they want to do. And also, these are all guys that were kind of carrying water in the past for previous regimes. Maybe Vrabel wants to establish his own culture and go with different guys and kind of shift the entire dynamic of that locker room. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's quite possible, and I think you make a good point there. I mean, when you're dealing with culture, not that any of these guys are bad players whatsoever or
Or
bad
bad
guys.
people. It has
Yeah,
nothing to do
no.
with that. Sometimes you just need to make a change. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
I think that, you're changing your direction of where you're going, and sometimes even good guys, you know, don't really fit what you're trying to do, and I think that's entirely possible. I always think back. I once sat on a plane next to Dave Rowe, who was a defensive tackle for the Patriots
Yep.
long time ago, and then he was doing games on NBC, and we were talking, and he said, he had been a good player for the Patriots when he came on. Chuck Fairbanks had just taken over the team, and he said Chuck did him a solid. He said, Dave, you've been a really good player, but we're looking for a different type of defense. But I'm going to do you a solid. I'm going to try to trade you to a contender. And he said he traded me to the Raiders, and I got a Super Bowl ring that year. And I always think of that because, sometimes that's just the way it's going to be.
100%. Man, there's so many different directions to go, Steve. I'm just trying. My head's kind of spinning on where you want to go next. I guess let's kind of continue in the same vein. So you have Elliot Wolf too, who spoke. I thought it was something. I don't want to put you on the spot too much here, but I don't want to put you too much on the spot here. But you had mentioned to me on the phone offline that you thought Elliot Wolf sounded kind of shaky. And I didn't hear it that way. Now, to your point, I heard 2 or 3 different Boston media members. They weren't making a big deal out of it, but they had just kind of mentioned it in passing. They felt the same way. I think Phil Perry mentioned. I don't want to. I don't hold me to these names, but I think Phil Perry mentioned it. If I'm not mistaken, I know Felger mentioned it. I heard him talk about it.
Heaven forbid I'm
Yeah,
agreeing with Felger.
I know. I mean, look, I'm gonna hear. I'm gonna look outside, make sure there's not any pigs flying. But I mean, seriously, I don't. Again, they weren't over the top, negative
No,
take. It
no,
was just
and
it was just kind of a reaction to it. So you kind of felt that. There was a report. Man, this is terrible podcasting. I apologize. I can't remember who it was from. Who said that the control of the 53-man roster was actually in Elliot Wolf's contract last year, that he had final say of the 53-man roster. He confirmed that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be here long term. We still don't know. A lot of these guys' contracts run through the draft. We'll see after the draft's over. If he's still here after 2 or 3 weeks after that, then I'll say, well, he's probably here for a while then. He's not going anywhere. I still have to think it's Vrabel's show. But give me your take on anything that Elliot Wolf mentioned, who also affirmed what Vrabel said about the trenches, by the way. Anything that he said, how he said it, how he looked, his comportment, his contract rumors, anything about Elliot Wolf that you want to talk about?
yeah, and he kind of hinted around about Travis Hunter being not only the best cornerback in the draft, but the best wide receiver in the draft. And I heard that rumor as well from other people. And I think, again, I think it was Phil who said that, but I don't want to put words in his mouth. And that tells you a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all sitting here talking about the trenches, which we know they need a lot of work there. But if a team says that, you kind of have to put your ear to the ground and wonder if he's still there, which I kind of doubt, at number 4. Are they going to wait to fill the trenches and take a guy like him? I mean, because I think most people consider him a cornerback first, but his skills as a wide receiver can't be ignored. Now, I mean, even he came out and said himself that he's going to be a two-way player full time.
Yep.
Uh, Mike Vrabel gave him a hard time about that when the Patriots interviewed him, and it was all in joking because Vrabel said, "Hey, a lot of guys used to do that," meaning himself.
Yes.
And I don't know if he actually understood that, but he laughed along with Vrabel.
I'll
Um,
say this though, they're speaking of rumors. I don't want to step on your point, but just to interject because I do think it's kind of pertinent to the conversation. There was another report coming out this last week that the Patriots had Travis Hunter as the number one ranked wide receiver of this year's class and the number one ranked cornerback. Elliot Wolf alluded to the fact that Matt Groh actually did 2 separate scouting reports for him at each position. Now, say what you want about Matt Groh. I have my own feelings towards him. I'm not crazy about him personally. I do think it's a little unfair to pin some of the misses on him and not give Bill, or Gerard or Elliott any other flack because ultimately when Bill was here, he was the ultimate decision maker, so to me, it's like, that's a kind of a different side topic for a different day. But he's an NFL evaluator who scouted the player at 2 different positions totally separately. You had the Titans and Browns basically saying, I forget which one was which, basically saying they viewed him as a receiver. The other one said they viewed him as a corner. So you have a very split thing. To me, Steve, with Travis Hunter, I have a hard time believing that Abdul Carter's getting to 4. He would be my first choice overall, personally. For the Patriots, I'm saying if the Patriots could pick any player in the draft, I would take Abdul Carter first. I think he's the best player. I think he has the most unique skill set. They could use pass rush and front 7 help. I think he'd be a home run. The tackle conversation we're going to get into shortly, so let's put a tab in that. And Travis Hunter, to me personally, Steve, I would go ahead and play him full-time as a receiver, and then I would work him in certain packages, 3rd and longs, obvious passing situations late in game. I don't think, I haven't heard this as much. I'm a little surprised. I don't even think it's crazy for him to potentially play safety. Even if they want to drop into like some zone coverages and have him play like the deep middle, I know he's a cornerback, but he has the ball skills and the awareness to play really kind of almost a center field position too. So in certain scenarios, I do think it'd be easier for him to just pick one and then play the other position as a weapon. Personally, I think if they're going to use him, I think him and Drake May could actually really establish a great connection, and he could bring some flair and some pizzazz to the offense, which desperately needs something.
Yeah, I think we all agree on that. I mean, the offense lacks that one game breaker. I mean, they have guys that can catch the ball and move the chains, but they don't have a game breaker. And I'm not saying, quote unquote, the number 1 receiver.
But you need talent. But
Yeah.
it's also a talent thing, though, Steve. I mean,
Yeah,
like
it is.
it's not.
It's a talent thing, and they don't have a receiver that's going to keep opposing defensive coordinators up at night. Not saying it has to be, the proverbial X who can, throw the ball down. You throw the ball down the field, and he's going to beat you, in a deep game. But they don't have that guy now. You and I talked a long time ago about a guy like Deebo Samuel, who was really, I thought, the guy they should have went for. I know we agree on that, but he wasn't a proverbial X, but he was a guy that you had to account for in every play, and they need that guy. Not saying it's got to be a Deebo Samuel type, but they need that talented guy who's going to, put fear in the heart of defenses.
Right. And that kind of, and I know we're all over the board here, and I do want to circle back to some of the combine standouts and some guys that we talked about and the offensive tackle conversation. I do want to get to that. I'm going to do that after the break, Steve. But just to keep going on some of these rumors, there's been a lot of talk about T. Higgins. We talked about that. That dream is pretty much dead for Patriots fans. As you and I talked about offline over the weekend, I I strongly feel this way. I'm sure the Patriots will look at adding some talent from the passing game perspective, but I do think the focus is going to be on the trenches and kind of getting Vrabel's roster established. It's not a strong receiver draft. It is not a strong free agent receiver class. So if you're not going to make a big trade, I think it's going to be really hard. Now, we already knew, we meaning collectively as Patriots Nation, we already knew it was going to be basically impossible for them to fill every need this offseason. But they need to make an appropriate step forward, Steve. My thing is that you build through the trenches, you focus on everything else. You try to make sure that Drake May has an upgraded pass catcher room, even though it's probably not what people want, but it's better than what it was. But most importantly, you get those defensive line, those trenches secured, and then next year you can really add for that cherry on top for that for some of those explosive playmakers. Because right now, there's really very few people that you want to trade the number 4 overall pick for, even if it's a weak draft class. And there's not a whole lot of guys available. It takes 2 to tango. I keep hearing, oh well, the Patriots should trade down. The Patriots should trade down. Well, there's a lot of people that want to trade down. You need to find people that want to trade up. You can't, and you got to get appropriate, value back, Steve. So I think that's where there's some conflicting things. But like, I'll use this guy for an example. Michael Mayer, who is the tight end for the Las Vegas Raiders. He was drafted the year before Brock Bowers. Obviously, Brock Bowers had a historic rookie season. We knew he was going to be a stud, and he really lived up to the hype, which is hard to do when you come out with that much hype, but he did. And Michael Mayer, coming out of Notre Dame a couple of years, I think this is his 3rd or 4th year. I think it's his 3rd year, if I'm not mistaken. But his 3rd or 4th year here, and the Patriots have Hunter Henry, but if they can go ahead and trade a late day 2, early day 3 pick for a tight end, I do think tight end's a need. And it has nothing against Austin Hooper. Maybe he comes back, maybe he doesn't. Maybe Jaheim Bell comes along, but maybe you go ahead and you start working on kind of developing your quote unquote next Hunter Henry and your tight end who can still grow with Drake for the next 8 years. I think Mayer's certainly in the conversation and someone who the Patriots have been linked to a little bit in the past, and I think would be a good fit for their offense and for Drake May.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, there's so many variables at this point, right? We don't know where their heads are at. I would love to be a fly on the wall in the building because there's so many different ways to go with this, and I'm looking forward to seeing how everything unfolds because I do think they're going to have to make some tough choices.
Yeah, no, they definitely are. Any other rumors? Again, we're going to get to the combine stuff and a couple other things later, but any other rumors that you wanted to bring up?
I think we touched on everything. I should have written all my notes down.
Yeah,
Again,
we can
bad
kind of
podcasting.
Yeah, we can kind of circle back. There's a lot to unpack. Like definitely, there really is. It's just been one of those things where there's so much news circulating. We talked about maybe trying to do a show last week for what it's worth, for just the listener's sake. It was hard with our schedules the way it was, and there's so much kind of coming at you that we felt like we could digest it. This is kind of more of a reaction podcast. We'll probably do something later in the week or early next week too, and we have to start going through our positional breakdowns and everything, which we'll talk about because we're really not that far away from free agency and the draft. I mean, it's going to sneak up on us real quick here, so that's going to be extremely
free
exciting.
agency starts the legal tampering period starts in less than a week.
I know. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to that. Well, let's step aside here for podcast purposes. When we get back, we'll talk about some of the NFL Combine standouts and some guys that caught Steve's and my attention. We'll be back right after this. All right, we're back here on Patriots 4th and 2. Derek Haven, Steve Bales, Jerry. Again, brought to you by PatsFans.com. Please do subscribe to us on our Patriots 4th and 2 YouTube channel, as well as like us on Apple Podcasts. If you can share, or leave us a review, whether it's Apple or anywhere you listen to podcasts, it keeps us high on the the podcast ranking, so other Patriots fans can find us. So, Steve, standouts from the Combine. Man, there was a couple of different ones. I saw, your boy Nick from South Carolina really stood out.
Oh my God!
Yeah, we'll get to him in a second. We'll get to him in a second.
Yeah.
He worked his way. He made some money this week, as they say.
Yes.
Before we talk about standouts, even, can we talk about a couple of guys that I thought really hurt themselves? I thought the non-competitive nature of the quarterbacks not throwing at these combines more and more really bothers me on so many levels. A lot of them, I understand wanting to do it for your pro day and maybe even hype up, like Shedeur Sanders, for example, who I'm not the biggest fan of, not personally. I don't know. For one, I don't know him. I have no problem with any player showing some confidence or anything like that, because I know that can kind of rub some people the wrong way. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. I think he's only an okay prospect. There's some potential there for sure, but I'd be scared to take him with a high pick. But like, he wanted to go ahead and throw at Colorado because he wanted to go ahead and throw to his guys. He also mentioned kind of giving his other guys a boost, getting them some recognition too. And I respect that. I understand that. At the same time, I feel like it's important for some of these guys to throw. Now, then you have some guys who threw at the combine who definitely shouldn't have. It was not pretty. I thought, I hate to say this, and I'm not in love with the prospect, but it is my alma mater. University of Arizona receiver Ted McMillan chose not to run in the 40. To me, honestly, I think that looks really bad, because because there's been a lot of rumors about my 40 time, and yeah, we know he's not a Blazer. That's okay. You don't have, not every receiver who's been great in the NFL has been a sub 4.4 guy. That's okay, but he does a lot of things well. But if I was a competitor and I knew that I was going to run better than these rumors, I would go out there and show it and shut the critics up. He would have solidified himself in the top 10, 12 picks. Instead, now people are wondering if he's going to be there in the late 20s, early second round. I mean, Mel Kiper in his last mock that I saw, I don't know if he's updated it since, didn't even have him in the first round. And that's based off what he's hearing. So to me, I think that there's been some weak stuff, from some of the competitive nature of some of these guys. Before we get to the standout, Steve, any thought on anything I just mentioned?
I think for the quarterbacks, for anybody really, I think, they should participate in the combine just in case. What happens if they decide, hey, I don't want to run at the combine, I don't want to throw at the combine, and then they have a bad day at their pro day. That's the only thing people are going to remember. What if you get sick the night before your pro day? And then you go out there and you're not feeling, well. I mean, I think this is built in, safety net for these guys. There's a question about, Ted's speed, right? So why not run at the combine? You can if you don't run well, you can make it up at your pro day. I really think that some of these guys hurt their stock by doing so. And in regards to Sanders, I know some people thought he came across as brash and arrogant. That was his dad. That's how he grew up.
Yep.
And there's, if you can back it up, who cares, right? And that's what Dion did. And that's what this guy is planning on doing. We don't know if he's going to ever attain that level. But for me, I mean, that's a story for another day. Had I thought he should have thrown.
I thought that Sanders he had a opportunity. I think a lot of people, based on what I've heard on podcasts and interviews, what I've read, just people I've talked to, no one who's like important, but just like little conversation, just kind of all the information that we gather for whatever avenue. I thought that he had an opportunity to really solidify himself as, at least in the conversation for the first quarterback, and definitely be the second quarterback. I don't know if he really helped himself that much, and yeah, to your point, he was raised by his dad who had that, but his dad was a generational talent. I don't think he is. Now that doesn't mean that he's not worth a selection, and he's not pro, he's not capable of being in the pros. I mean, that will be to be determined. I think his decision making and his ball placement's really good. I do worry about some other things, but we don't have to do a whole scouting report on him. But I did think that he had an opportunity to do this. Let's not forget. People talk about, to your point, people talk about Deion Sanders, and his personality. I remember one of my favorite Deion Sanders stories ever is he sat down with the Giants at the NFL Combine, and they wanted him to take like this massive test, and he looked at them and he said, "What pick are you?" And they said, "Oh, we're picking 10th." And he shut the book and he said, "I won't be here anyway." So I mean, just I'm not saying that Sanders is like that, but it was pretty funny. He's like, "Yeah, I'm not going to make it to 10, so
No.
I'm not doing this." But I did think that was funny. But I do think Cam Ward ultimately will be the first quarterback taken. I mean, and let's be honest, the Patriots want 2 quarterbacks to go in the top 3. I mean, that would be a dream scenario. Because then you have your pick of Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, whoever's not there, because one of them's going to go if the 2 quarterbacks go. I think, Steve, that you are in a position right now, and there's a couple names that I want to bring up, but there's been 4 popular names associated with the Patriots. So I'm going to throw them out there. I do want to talk about some of the tackles and offensive linemen because I do think it's important to the conversation and the standouts and everything. But I'm going to throw this at you. We got 4 players who are consistently tied with the Patriots at that 4th overall pick. You got Abdul Carter, the edge player, linebacker, Penn State. You got Travis Hunter, receiver, cornerback, Colorado. You got Will Campbell, the tackle, maybe guard from LSU. And I would also say Mason Graham, the defensive lineman from Michigan. Now, Will Campbell's arm length, big conversation throughout the week. He came in at 32 5/8. Doesn't hit the 33 threshold. Really concerning there. Abdul Carter, there was a conversation about the stress fracture in his foot. Seems like he doesn't need to have surgery, so that's good for him. Hunter, you have 2 positions, but where's he going to play? Where does he want to play? How do you focus on using him? Mason Graham, really, really impressive player, very disruptive. Also came in at 295, which really, there was a lot of people that were really pretty worried about that weight number with how light he is. I'm not as worried about it. I do think he fits. I think all 4 players you can make a strong case for. Now, there are other players too, but those 4 names, I would say it's fair of me to say that those have been the most associated names with the team at their selection. How would you rank them, Steve, 1 through 4 in not what you think the team would do, in your preference? How would you rank those 4 guys?
I think Abdul Carter is probably my number 1 out of those 4 guys. I think he's going to be a generational type of talent as an edge guy. I think, and this would be 1A, 1B. I think, Hunter is right beside him. I think, when you look at him, he's a great receiver. He's a great corner. And, a lot of people say, well, where's he going to play? Well, that's just first world problems, right? I mean, you have a guy that could be a potential all-pro at either position. When I look at a guy like him, I mean, who would love to have a guy like that? And what a problem to have. You have a potential all-pro at corner or wide receiver, and you could, eventually pick a position and he could still play the other, at a very high level. So I think, after that, I'm going with Mason Graham as the 3rd. I think because I know people are like, oh, he's under 300 pounds. He's 295. I mean, are you telling me that 5 pounds is going to make the difference between him being a really, really great player or just a mediocre one? I don't think so. Because again, I watched the tape, and the tape doesn't lie. You look at these guys and they can play it, and I feel the same way about Will Campbell, and I don't think he's that far behind, Graham. Again, I mean, he's what, 3/8 of an inch off that 33-inch threshold that everyone is so worried about.
Yep.
You watch the tape with him, and I mean, he played in the SEC. He started as a freshman, and he was playing against really good pass rushers in the SEC. I mean, we always look at those guys that come out of there, and there's a lot of them, and you have to, say, hey, this kid gave up 5 sacks in 3 years. I think he can play. I don't worry about his arm length as much. Yeah, there's a little bit of issues, with inside moves because he takes that,
he's very aggressive. He's very
Yeah.
aggressive. So sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that can be a bad thing. I think
Sure.
that I think with Campbell, the downside, I mean, people say this about Isaiah Wynn. I think it's even more true here than it was then. And look, I think there was something about a mental makeup with Wynn too that needs to be accounted for, which is hard for us to gauge without being in the room with him. But from everything that I've heard about Campbell, this guy just wants to play football and he loves to be a mauler. I think that worst case scenario, if he doesn't work out at tackle, you're looking at a Pro Bowl caliber guard who's going to be there for a long period of time, who can bring some nastiness. The rumors, going back to what we talked about with the Patriots, is you think you have your center in David Andrews, because I think he's going to be coming this year. Okay, and maybe you have to work on a development there. Maybe it's Jake Andrews, maybe it's Cole Strange, or maybe it's whoever else they have kind of working in at center to kind of groom for the future. You have your right guard in Onwenu, and Elliot Wolf, by the way, did say that he does prefer Onwenu's main position to be guard. So I think that the Patriots are going to come in and they're going to be looking to upgrade both tackle positions and left guard coming into this year. So if you take Campbell and you want to play him at left tackle and it doesn't work out, I still think that you have Todd, we'll get to that in a second. You still think you have a left guard in Campbell too. I think he's nasty. Armand Membou is a guy from a standout perspective, which has really started causing a little bit of wake, Steve. Dane Brugler, who we all know is one of the best in this business. He, in his mock draft post-combine, he had the Patriots taking Missouri tackle Armand Membou at number 4 overall. Just to recap what he said, teams are warming up to the idea that Membou could go this high. His tape is good enough. His testing was more than good enough. That said, he is still just 20, and he had to pull out of the Senior Bowl because of an illness, so teams have some homework to do on him, but he is in the mix to be the first offensive lineman drafted. He's not the only one. There's been some big time, guys that are in the know and have been doing this and considered kind of the forefathers of a lot of this draft stuff that are putting Membou in that conversation. Look, if there's a lot to like about him. I mean, for one, he's 6'4", he's 332 pounds. He's got, 33 basically and a half-inch arms. So he crosses that threshold. He's quick. He ran a sub 540, explosiveness, strong, 34 reps. I'm sorry. Let's see here. No, sorry. 34-inch vertical jump. He clears Campbell athletically in almost all boxes. The tape is a little back and forth. I like both players for different reasons. I do think that I love Campbell's kind of mental makeup. Membou, I'm going to go ahead and watch some more. But something that Dane highlighted, Steve, that I thought was interesting was that he's only 20 years old and he does cross those thresholds. And so you are talking about potentially taking someone who could be protecting Drake May for the next 10 to 12 years. Maybe he's not perfect in year one, but maybe you're taking your left tackle of the future, or maybe it doesn't last. Maybe it's a little bit of a learning curve this first year. It can't be worse than what they had last year. And then in year 2, they're rocking and rolling. You're into Drake May's year 3. You got Membou kind of at his 22-year-old age, second season, and now you're rocking and rolling.
Yeah, the only issue I would have with him, and I've seen a lot of buzz about him, is he played right tackle.
Yep.
Can he make the transition? And again, like you said, he's only 20 years old.
But you know what, too?
He's
You
not
know what?
even fully grown yet. I
Oh,
mean,
no, I know he's still, I mean, he's, with all due respect to him, I mean, he's still a kid. I mean,
yeah,
he's still growing. So right tackle, Steve. I know there's a big thing about left tackle, right tackle. The Patriots apparently going to be all in on Ronnie Stanley if he hits the market, the left tackle from Baltimore. If Membu is a right tackle, and we know that right tackle, left tackle it's not the same thing as it was maybe 20, even 30 years ago. You need both tackles to be good. It's not just the blind side guy, especially when you have Drake's mobility. If Membu's a really good right tackle, and you take Stanley and you can kind of develop a left tackle over the next couple of years while Stanley kind of holds down for a bit, I think you're in the position to have two really good bookend players there. And then all you have to do is focus on left guard for however it shakes out.
yeah. I think that's a good, um, a good point there. The other guy that I think is like he's kind of like the, how do you say it, a dark horse, um, X factor is Josh Simmons from Ohio State. Now he tore his patella tendon in, I think it was October. Um, and supposedly his rehab is going great. He's actually planning on doing some of the workouts at Ohio State's pro day. I'm wondering if he enters that conversation, if all of his medicals check out.
Right. I wonder that too.
I mean, prior to his injury, I mean, I thought and I read that he was probably the number one tackle prospect in the NFL. Um, you know, um, his first few games, he was dominant. Um, and again, I mean, this whole Ronnie Stanley thing. If they get Ronnie Stanley, that I think your left guard, I mean your left tackle is checked. But you know, do you still take one high or do you go for the right side? I mean, these are the things that are going to have to be answered. I think there's a couple of other guys, that are very interesting. I don't know that um, I don't think the Patriots would take the kid from Minnesota, Ursery. I don't
Yeah,
think that.
Dante Armstrong.
Yeah, I don't think he would be a first rounder. But if they were to, like, again, they get a guy like Ronnie Stanley in the first round in free agency, maybe your first round pick if Hunter or Carter are there, you take him and maybe he's a day two guy.
I think that I I'm kind of leaning. So let me scroll back just real quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I asked you the question about the four prospects and how you would rank them. To
Mm-hmm.
answer it for myself, I would take Abdul Carter and I would sprint the card up if he was there at four. Sprinted. I
Yeah,
wouldn't even hesitate with any other player.
I'm with you there.
Travis Hunter, I probably would go next because I'm intrigued with his playmaking ability, and I know that he hasn't found 100% of a home, but I think he'll be able to help you. And as much as I love Marcus Jones and I loved him coming out of the draft, we talked about him pre-draft, and I love that they took him, and I think he's been a good player. I think Travis Hunter is basically a very souped up Marcus Jones. He can play both sides of the ball. I think he's even more so than Marcus Jones. And it's not even, and this isn't even a slight on Marcus Jones. I mean, Marcus Jones is a slot corner that it's great with the ball in his hands and a great dynamic returner. So they want to get him the ball in his hands on offense. I wish they did it more. But Travis Hunter's a guy who I would prefer to see him more on offense and then working on defense instead of the reverse. But either way, wherever he's going to be, fit, I think that he makes the most sense. I'd go Campbell next and then Graham. We talked about this offline, Steve. There's so many really good defensive linemen in this class. Daniel Jeremiah had 24, if I'm not mistaken, 24 defensive linemen with starter grades. that means that you're going to be able to get a starting defensive lineman late day 2, early day 3. So that hurts the Mason Graham crowd. Not that it's a knock on him, but why would I take a player at 4 overall when I feel like the tackle market's going to dry up fast in the first round, or at least the top 40 at the very least, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why would I take a defensive lineman there when I can go ahead and use my third round, one of my thirds on a defensive tackle and still get a good starter, at a defensive tackle, and take my offensive tackle and my receiver early, or my running back or my receiver. I mean, there's or my tight end, whatever position you want to go. I mean, literally anything. I mean, I threw out the kid from Trey Henderson from Ohio State. The running back, I threw out his name on Twitter. I got lambasted. You would have thought that it was the worst thing in the world. Oh, why'd the Patriots take a running back with their second pick? Because he's a dynamic third down back, who, by the way, McDaniels, who's back, succeeded with for years and years. And you don't think that, to go back to Todd's point about Mondre, I don't think they're moving him. Okay. But if you're telling me that you have a guy in Amari and Hampton that a lot of people think is one of the best running backs in the class from UNC that played with Drake, or you don't think a Hendrickson who was explosive in the playoffs and helped Ohio State win it all, you don't think that he could be dynamic in this offense, I would tell you you're wrong. You could look at any position, pretty much. The only position I don't want to see in the first round is quarterback and some kind of interior offensive lineman. That's really, everything else is pretty much on the table. I don't really care. And I know that and that is the contradiction with the Will Campbell stuff, because we have to see where he's at. But to me, I want to go ahead and see them take somebody who's going to be another pillar of this franchise. You have Drake May, you have Christian Gonzalez. Make sure that you continue to add pillars to build this new regime and move it forward, Steve.
Yes, and I agree with that. And to Todd's point, what about Mondre? Well, I think the Patriots recognize his talent. I don't think that's a question at all. I think he can be one of the better backs in the NFL. But, due to a combination of really poor blocking up front, and his fumbling issues, and that's the big thing. They can't have a repeat of last year with 7 fumbles. They can't. I mean, this offense is not built to withstand that. I mean, if you had a prolific offense that's lighting it up every game, you might be able to gloss over that a little. But with this team, you can't do it. You can't. And I think that's a big thing moving forward. If his fumbling issues aren't a thing of the past, I could see them trading him. Most definitely.
Yeah. I think everything's on the table. I don't think there are some people who I've heard a couple things where they're talking about getting rid of certain players. Oh, Kendrick Bourne. Oh, well, it's, Godchow. It's Mondre. It's whoever it is. They just signed so-and-so to an extension last year, the year before. He's not going anywhere. New regime, people. They have the money. They don't care. This is about establishing Mike Vrabel's handprint on this roster. Elliott Wolf stuff's been there. Elliott Wolf probably was constricted by whatever Bill wanted to do anyway. I'm not saying that I'm happy about where he's at. I mean, I've been very vocal about wanting Adam Peters, who went to the Commanders. I wanted Mike Bergonzi, who's now with the Titans. Like there are different guys that I would have gone, but Elliott Wolf is here. I'm curious to see what he does. But at the end of the day, Mike Vrabel's new. This is not the same thing. I know it was a different regime last year with Mayo, but at the same time, he was coming from that same tree and that same kind of line of thinking. Vrabel's style, even though I think there are things that he takes from Belichick and he's used from Belichick from his playing days as a player, under a coach, he never really coached him and he doesn't really play the same. I think some of the similarities with Vrabel, Steve, and Belichick is basically, situational football, being able to win close games in the fourth quarter, having that mental toughness. Those are things. But there's a lot of different things. He's more aggressive. He's a little bit more ballsy, where Belichick kind of likes to play the wait and see game, let the opponent make the mistake, have them take a misstep and go ahead and shoot. Vrabel wants to be the dictator in terms of he wants to dictate the flow of the game, the attitude of the game. He wants his guys to penetrate upfield on the defensive line, where Belichick wants to go ahead and contain the pocket. my whole point is that there are some similarities, but there are differences, and I'm curious to see what Vrabel and Wolf do with this roster. I don't think there are any sacred cows. Like I said before, and I'll say it again, there's only 2 guys on this roster who should consider themselves safe, and that's Gonzo and May.
Yeah, yeah, you could be right. I mean, and Vrabel said at the combine, the roster you see today is going to be vastly different in August.
100%.
I mean, he's made that pretty clear.
Yep.
So,
absolutely. Well, Steve, I guess we have a couple different places we could go next. We have probably about 10 minutes left. Do you want to talk about any more standouts? Anyone else catch your eye that you wanted to bring up from the combine?
well, I think, you talked about the kid from South Carolina, the safety, Nick, Eman Mori, I think is how you pronounce it.
Eman Warrior, I want to say.
Eman Mori, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a big dude. He's a safety.
I was about to pull his because he's basically the prototypical, like, he was always in the mix in terms of being a top 50 pick. People are talking about him as a top 15 pick now.
Yeah. 6'3", 220.
Yep.
I mean, that's a good size safety, right?
Ran a 4.38 40-yard dash, 10-yard split of 1.49 seconds, 43-inch vertical jump, 11.6 broad jump, 20 reps on the bench. I thought this was interesting. I had heard a couple of comps to Derwin James. Lance Zierlein, I had compared him to Jeremy Chin, who I also loved coming out of the draft several years ago. I think there's a really good comp there. He always put it this way. Whether you like his tape or not, what people who are going to watch him or who's listening to the show, whether you're going to watch his highlights or not, what you have to understand too is that the NFL, and I'm going to steal this line from Trevor Sikkema of PFF, the NFL loves to draft aliens, and Nick's one of those guys. He is a physical specimen. And by the way, if I don't know who's listening. I love to recommend certain podcasts that I like. We've mentioned a lot of Patriots ones. If anyone's wanting to listen to a good draft podcast, Connor Rogers and Trevor Sikkema, the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, brought to you by PFF, is phenomenal. I've listened to Connor since he was with Matt Miller back on the Stick to Football podcast back in the day when they were both at Bleacher Report. Now Matt Miller's doing great things at ESPN. Connor's doing some things with NBC, and Trevor, I never listened to him until I saw Connor and Trevor on this draft, and they talk about different positions. They go through certain scenarios. If you want to learn more about some of the players, I could not recommend that podcast enough. So I did want to give them a plug for that because it's definitely great content there for draft season and stuff. And they do stuff all year long, but it's really good. So anyways, yeah, Steve, I think you kind of rule out what he did. I mean, I thought that there was some big times. I thought the tight end from LSU, why am I blanking on his name? It's not Mason Taylor, I don't think. The tight end from LSU, I thought had a really good showing. I'll look him up in a second here too. He was impressive. Anyone else stand up to you, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, again, you're looking at an edge guy, right?
Yeah, Mason Taylor. Okay.
Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M. Now, everyone knew he's athletic.
He was going to blow it up, but man, that's different.
Yeah, but again, the guy's 6'5", 267 pounds, and his vertical was 40 inches. I mean, you're talking about a guy with absolute explosion there, 4.59 in the 40. I mean, for a guy that's 267 pounds, 10'11" broad jump. I mean, and you watch his tape and all of that. I mean, we knew he was athletic because when you watch the tape, you're like, this guy can play, But then when you saw, this is why the combine is fun. When you see a guy that large turn in that kind of performance and at 267, you just have to say, okay, like you said earlier, this guy's an alien, right? I mean, he's an athletic freak.
A lot of people
And
thought. A lot of people I saw projections of him late first, early second. I mean, he's another guy who might have talked himself or worked himself out into the top 20 and made some money over the weekend. He had a phenomenal workout. I mean, really, really impressive.
yeah, yeah, I thought he was really impressive. Another guy, and he's an edge guy from Georgia.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, I know. Go ahead.
Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. And now I know you're going to get to the other guy from
Yeah.
Georgia, but Dawkins, and again, the strength and conditioning guys at Georgia continually, push out these professionals who are just athletic freaks. And he's another guy. He's 6'5", 276 pounds, and he ran a 4.8 in the 40 at 276. 36-inch vertical leap, 10-foot 4 broad jump. He had a 1.69 10-yard split. I'm like, I mean, this guy is huge. And his top speed came at 20.59 miles an hour. That's ridiculous. I
Yeah.
mean, and again, he has very impressive tape. But you see a guy that big, I mean, a 276-pound guy that runs and can jump like that. That is so impressive. And again, those guys at Georgia, those strength and conditioning coaches, I mean, somebody needs to hire them at the next level.
No, 100%. A couple other guys I want to mention. I'll rapid fire through a couple of these guys, Steve. Xavier Restrepo, the University of Miami receiver. I thought he was pretty impressive. I thought that he looked like he was tailor-made to just eat in Josh McDaniels' offense. And speaking of that, just in the same line, Phil Perry had mentioned how a lot of people around the league thought that Pop Douglas was going to have a big year in Josh McDaniels' offense. I've been thinking that for a while now. I've been kind of surprised that people have been kind of discrediting Pop a little bit. I'm not saying he's a top 2, maybe even a top 3 guy, but he's definitely a contributor on your offense. He's the third, fourth receiver in the league all day long, and I think he's shown that he has a pretty good chemistry with May on a couple of different plays. We saw this last year, and I think McDaniel's offense, he's only going to get better. The other guy I want to mention from Georgia, opposite of who you mentioned, Jalen Walker. I mean, man, talk about another guy who's incredibly athletic, 6'1", 243, 32-inch arms. He is a guy that is all over the field, basically split time between linebacker and edge player. And the great thing about Georgia is we know that the Bulldogs have been just cranking NFL talent. They've been a pipeline for years now. But the other thing is, too, is with how great that program is, I think one of the best things about Walker, who I know my boys Evan Lazar and Mike Dussault from Patriots.com are in love with, too. The thing that I find most impressive is talk about all the guys that have come out of Georgia. This guy and Jalen Walker apparently is one of the best leaders they've had in the building in a long time, that they can't rave enough about this young man. So would it be rich at 4? Yeah. But if they really like him that much, what's the difference between taking him at 4 and taking him at 10 or 8? Whatever. If he's a good player, it doesn't matter. I think he is a guy that you can move all over the front 7 formation, and a guy who's going to be a culture builder for Vrabel. I think that's important too. The last guy I wanted to mention, and I wasn't sure if his first name was Mason or not. I don't know why I had the brain fart, but it's Mason Taylor, the LSU tight end. I would encourage anyone to go look at his drills, how well he ran. His father, infamous Hall of Fame bloodlines, and Jason Taylor. So we know Vrabel's very familiar with him.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who I think that would be an excellent Hunter Henry replacement down the line. Could go ahead and work inside, outside. You could move him around a bit. Great hands, and by all means, a good character kid. I think that this would be another great position. If you're listening, Mason Taylor is a guy you need to go ahead and, kind of put a little asterisk next to.
Yeah. In fact, I took Mason in my first mock draft last week.
In what round? 38 or
yes.
pick 38?
Yeah.
Yep.
And Again, you got the NFL bloodlines. This guy, I think he hasn't even reached his potential yet. I just think overall he's going to be a really good tight end in the NFL. And going back to Jalen Walker, I mean, I love this guy's tape, and he was
There's a lot to
new.
love.
Yeah, he was new to playing off the ball last year, but I thought he handled himself well. And if you draft him as an inside backer, an off the ball linebacker, whatever you want to call it, he's going to give you that sideline to sideline, athleticism. I think he's pretty good in coverage. We know he can get after the passer. So, he's got speed. He's got that athleticism. He can cover cover running backs and tight ends. I think, if a guy like Carter or Hunter are gone, and they're still sitting there at 4, or even if they trade back to, like you said, 7 or 8, I think he would be an easy pick to make.
I agree. There's a lot to there's a lot to like about Walker, and look, there's a lot of guys, Steve, that we could go into in even more detail. And we will.
One thing I wanted to add about Walker.
Sure.
If they draft him, you and I are going to bring back that John Gruden, right? That double
cross dog blitz, baby. The old Jamie Collins. Let's do it. I can't wait. I miss the cross dog blitz, man.
The cross dog blitz, man.
Oh, man.
Because I knew we were going to talk about him today, and I've been waiting I thought you were going to bring that up, but I was like,
I was holding off on it, but it was in the back of my mind. I'm not going to lie. Steve, I do have to wrap up because I have to get going, but I want to tell everyone, I'll get final thoughts here from you in a second, but I do want to tell everyone, I appreciate everyone listening, interacting. I know we've always been trying to do our normal Wednesday schedule. I still want to aim for that, but it's right now, there's a lot of rumors going around. There's a lot to unpack off the combine. So we want to get out a show as quickly as possible. I'm not sure when our next show is going to be. We could do one later this week. We could do one next week. I'm not sure, but we'll have a lot to talk about. Steve and I are going to have to talk offline about what our schedule is going to be for our prospect breakdowns. So we'll start working on that as well. And then we're going to have free agency too. We'll probably do, Steve, if I had to guess, we'll probably do some kind of prospect breakdown in the next week. It starts somewhere. And we're going to have to do some kind of free agent, preview and look at some positions and guys like that. So I think we're going to be busy here the next couple of weeks, but it should be a lot of fun things to talk about. Steve, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up today's show?
Well, I know you're behind the time limit, so, it was a lot of fun today, and hopefully, next week we're going to have some good free agents to talk about. Next week might be a 2-show week.
Oh, I think there's definitely a possibility for a 2-show week, Steve. 100%. If there's some big news, we will do our best to go ahead and throw out, even if it's a short episode, just a quick little hitter, just to go ahead and talk about it. Because I know everyone's excited. This is an exciting time of year. As Steve and I have said this for years and years. I love seeing the gameplay, the play on the field, obviously. But this is one of my favorite parts of the entire sport is the team building aspect. And there's so much to unpack and dive into. So looking forward to doing that. For Steve Balistrieri, I'm Derek Havens. Thank you again for listening to this episode of Patriots 4th and 2, brought to you by PatsFans.com. Please do subscribe to us on our YouTube and Apple Podcast channels. Like, share, leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It keeps us high in the podcast rankings so other Patriots fans can find us. And we will talk to you guys very soon. A lot to unpack. Go Pats.